I found out my father baby trapped my mother, then stole $700,000 in child support from me. I spent 20 years hating the wrong parent. My story was simple. Mom abandoned us when I was 2. Dad worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Grandma raised me while he sacrificed everything. Mom was the villain who chose freedom over family. Then I found her Instagram. Living in Paris, head chef at a Michelin restaurant, married to someone who looked like he stepped out of Vogue. I sent her a message so full of rage it took 40 minutes to type. Called her every name I knew. Said karma would find her for abandoning her daughter. She responded in 3 minutes. You deserve to say this to my face. I'll fly you here. I went without telling anyone. She met me at Charles de Gaulle, looking nothing like the monster I'd imagined. We went to her restaurant. I screamed at her for an hour while she sat there, taking it, tears streaming down her face. Why? I finally asked. Why did you leave? Your father trapped me. That's your excuse? She pulled out her phone. I have proof. Medical records. She'd told my father she was considering termination. She was 22, severely depressed, not ready. He'd threatened to destroy her career, her life, unless she had me. But you left anyway, after 2 years of trying. She showed me psychiatric evaluations, postpartum psychosis, intrusive thoughts about hurting me, hurting herself. On your 2nd birthday, I found out he'd sabotaged my birth control to get me pregnant. I attempted suicide that night. The involuntary commitment papers were dated on my birthday. The court declared me unfit. He got full custody. But I've paid child support every month for 18 years. We never got money from you. Dad worked overtime constantly. I couldn't even afford SAT prep. She showed me bank statements. $3,000 monthly. $700,000 total, all cashed by my father. I called him immediately, putting him on speaker without warning. Did Mom ever pay child support? That bitch never sent a dime. Why? I hung up. My mother pulled out her laptop, logged into Facebook, found my father's hidden profile, the one he thought I couldn't see. Vegas trips, motorcycle collection, a boat, investment properties, all while telling me we couldn't afford my college applications. He stole your future to punish me, she said. The forensic accountant found everything. $800,000 with interest, hidden across 17 accounts. The judge ordered full restitution plus damages. My father called sobbing. You're destroying our family. You destroyed it when you baby-trapped a woman, stole her money, and made me hate her for 20 years. My grandmother finally confessed she knew everything. He's my son. What could I do? Tell the truth. That was 8 months ago. I'm in therapy now, paid for with recovered money. Learning to rebuild a relationship with my mother, who introduces me as her daughter with tears in her eyes every time. But yesterday, everything changed again. My therapist, Dr. Rodriguez, who'd been helping me process everything, asked to see me urgently. I need to show you something. I could lose my license for this, but you deserve to know. She pulled out a file. Your father was my patient 15 years ago. Different last name. I didn't connect it until you mentioned your grandmother's maiden name. Inside were session notes. My father talking about his perfect plan. How he'd targeted my mother specifically because she had wealthy parents. How he'd researched family law. New mothers rarely lose custody unless they're declared unfit. How he'd documented her depression, saved evidence, planned everything. There's more, Doctor, Rodriguez said, hands shaking. He talks about another woman, before your mother. The notes described a college girlfriend who got away by having an abortion after he tried to trap her. Her name was blacked out, but one detail wasn't. She'd moved to Austin after graduating. He says he made sure the second one couldn't escape, Doctor, Rodriguez read, that he learned from his mistakes. I wasn't his first attempt. My mother wasn't his first victim. There's one more thing. She showed me the last page. He mentions keeping insurance on your mother. Something that would destroy her career if it got out. He called it his nuclear option if she ever tried to come back. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. Saw you're in contact with your mother. Remember, I still have those photos from her breakdown. The ones with you. Sure would be a shame if her fancy restaurant saw what kind of mother she really was. Another text, this time a photo. My mother, clearly in psychosis, being restrained by police. 2-year-old me screaming in the background. A third text. Drop the lawsuit or these go viral. You have 24 hours. I looked at Dr. Rodriguez. Can you testify about these notes? I'll lose my license, but yes. My phone rang. My mother. Sophie, I just got an email from your father. He has photos from my breakdown. He's threatening to send them to my employer, my husband, everyone. I could lose everything I've rebuilt. Mom, I don't care. Let him. But Sophie, there's something else. The first woman he trapped? I found her. She wants to talk to you. I hung up and immediately called her back, my fingers barely working right as I tapped her contact. Dr. Rodriguez pushed a notepad across her desk with a name and phone number written in neat handwriting while my mother answered on the first ring. I told her not to respond to anything from my father yet, that we needed to get everyone together before making any moves, and she agreed even though her voice sounded tight with fear. Dr. Rodriguez mouthed Alicia Noonan and pointed at the notepad. explaining in a whisper that she'd tracked the woman down through old university records after reading my father's session notes about the college girlfriend who escaped. I grabbed my phone and opened a new text message, my hands shaking so badly I had to retype Alicia's number twice before getting it right. I introduced myself as the daughter my father successfully trapped another woman into having, and I barely hit send before 3 dots appeared showing she was typing back. She asked if we could video chat right now, and I opened the app with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Her face filled my screen, a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and visible tension in her shoulders, sitting in what looked like a home office with medical textbooks behind her on a shelf. She started talking immediately, her words coming fast like she'd been waiting 20 years to say them to someone who would understand. She was 19 when my father targeted her specifically because her parents had money, and she wanted to be a doctor, and he'd seemed perfect at first, supportive and loving and everything she thought she wanted. He sabotaged her birth control by poking holes in condoms and replacing her pills with sugar pills he'd bought online, and she found out at 6 weeks pregnant when she went to the campus health center for what she thought was the flu. She terminated at a clinic 2 hours away despite his threats to ruin her medical school applications, and her voice stayed steady while she told me this part, but I could see her hands gripping her coffee mug too tight. She pulled up old emails on her laptop and turned the screen toward her camera so I could see them, messages from my father 20 years ago threatening to tell her conservative parents about the abortion and contact every medical school she applied to with character concerns about her judgment and morality. Her voice cracked when she explained she had to get a restraining order and transfer universities to escape him, that she'd spent 2 years looking over her shoulder and 3 more in therapy learning to trust people again. I stared at her through my phone screen and realized my father had been doing this for over 2 decades, that I was the only child who resulted from his traps, because Alicia got away and my mother couldn't. The pattern was so calculated it made me physically sick, my stomach churning like I might throw up right there in Dr. Rodriguez's office, but Alicia said she would testify about everything if it helped stop him from hurting anyone else. Dr. Rodriguez leaned into the camera view and explained she could face a licensing board investigation for revealing patient information, but she was willing to risk it because my father's notes described his tactics like a how-to guide for trapping women. She'd already contacted a lawyer about whistleblower protections and mandatory reporting exceptions for cases involving ongoing harm, and her voice was quiet but firm when she said some things mattered more than a license. I asked Alicia if she knew about other women my father might have targeted, and she nodded slowly before telling me he bragged in college about having a type, ambitious women from wealthy families who he could lock down with pregnancy. She remembered him obsessing over another pre-law student named Hannah after Alicia escaped, following her around campus and showing up at her study group uninvited until campus security got involved. My phone buzzed with another text from my father, and I looked down to see a second photo of my mother being restrained by police, this one closer up. So you could see her face twisted in agony and 2-year-old me screaming in the corner with my hands over my ears. The message below read just 2 words and a number, 23 hours, and my stomach turned because he was counting down like this was some kind of game he was winning. I saved the screenshot immediately and forwarded it to my mother and Dr. Rodriguez, then pulled up Rowan Marshall's contact, the attorney my mother hired for the financial lawsuit who'd already proven he knew how to fight my father. He answered on the second ring, and I explained the blackmail situation plus Dr. Rodriguez's revelations about the pattern of victims spanning 2 decades, my words tumbling out so fast I had to stop and breathe halfway through. He was quiet for maybe 5 seconds after I finished, then said this changes everything, that we needed to document the threats as extortion while building a bigger case that showed systematic abuse across multiple victims. His voice shifted into lawyer mode, crisp and focused, asking me to forward every text and email immediately, and not to respond to my father under any circumstances until we had a strategy in place. Rowan puts me on hold and I hear him dialing another number, his voice shifting into sharp legal mode as he explains the situation to someone at the district attorney's office. Dr. Rodriguez watches me from across her desk, her hands still resting on those therapy notes like she needs to keep them grounded in reality. Rowan comes back on the line and tells me he just spoke with Kenneth Harmon, the DA who handles blackmail and harassment cases, and they want copies of everything within the hour. He warns me this is going to get worse before it gets better, that my father will probably lash out when he realizes we're building a criminal case, but the countdown clock means we can't wait for him to make the first move. I'm saving screenshots of the text when my phone buzzes with an incoming call from my mother, and I answer to hear both her and Victor on speakerphone. My mother's voice is shaking as she tells me the restaurant's board of directors just received an anonymous email with one of the breakdown photos attached. The message claiming to be from a concerned party who questions whether someone with her history of mental problems should be running a kitchen where she has access to knives. Victor cuts in, his accent thicker than usual with anger, saying he wants to fly here right now and confront my father face to face, make him understand what he's done to our family. I put them on speaker so Rowan can hear, and he immediately tells Victor that any direct contact could mess up the legal case, that my father wants exactly that kind of confrontation so he can play victim. My mother makes a sound I've never heard from her before, something between a sob and a growl, and she says she spent 20 years being ashamed and scared, but something just broke inside her when she saw that email. She sounds different. Like the fear is still there, but it's mixed with something harder now. Something that won't back down anymore. Rowan suggests we set up a conference call with everyone who's involved, and for the next 3 hours, I'm on my phone with him, Dr. Rodriguez, my mother, and Alicia, all of us talking over each other at first until we settle into what feels like a war council. We map out a strategy that involves getting ahead of my father's blackmail by taking control of the story ourselves, telling the truth about my mother's postpartum psychosis and his exploitation before he can weaponize it against her. Dr. Rodriguez explains she needs to report her ethical breach to the licensing board before my father or anyone else does, framing it as mandatory reporting of ongoing abuse and a pattern of harm that she had a duty to expose. Her hands shake as she pulls up the licensing board website on her laptop, but she keeps saying that staying quiet would be worse than losing her license, that she can't let my father hurt anyone else just to protect her career. Alicia tells us she's booking a flight to arrive tomorrow morning, that she's taking emergency leave from her job as a hospital administrator to help build the case in person. She sounds scared but determined, her voice cracking when she says she spent 20 years wondering if my father did this to other women, if she could have stopped him somehow by speaking up sooner. Rowan tells us he's filing an emergency restraining order against my father right now, tonight, based on the blackmail texts and the therapy notes showing a pattern of harassment and abuse. He explains that judges take these things seriously when there's documented evidence of threats, especially when the victim is trying to protect others too. Dr. Rodriguez emails him the relevant pages from the therapy notes, the ones where my father describes his insurance policy and his plans to destroy my mother if she ever came back into my life. 2 hours later, Rowan calls back to say the judge granted a temporary restraining order that forbids my father from contacting me, my mother, or distributing any of those photos to anyone. The order is effective immediately, and violation carries serious penalties, including jail time. My phone buzzes with a text from my father less than an hour after the restraining order goes through. The message just says you'll regret this, and below it is a photo of my childhood home, the house where I grew up thinking he was a hero. I screenshot it immediately and send it to Rowan, my hands steadier than I expected. Rowan calls back within minutes and says this is exactly why we needed that restraining order, that my father just broke it and made our case stronger. He's already forwarding everything to Kenneth Harmon, who apparently told him that immediate violations show a pattern of harassment and prove the subject can't control his behavior. Kenneth says this violation helps the criminal case a lot, gives them leverage to push for actual charges instead of just the restraining order. I open my private social media accounts and start typing, my fingers moving faster than my thoughts. I explain that my mother had severe postpartum psychosis when I was 2, that it's a real medical condition that affects thousands of women, that my father exploited her illness and documented her worst moments to use against her 20 years later. I say that anyone who receives photos of her breakdown should know they're part of a blackmail campaign by someone who trapped her into pregnancy and stole her child support for 2 decades. My mother posts something similar on her accounts, her words careful and clear about the medical reality of her condition and how my father weaponized it. Victor posts a statement from the restaurant addressing the malicious allegations, explaining that the board stands behind my mother completely and recognizes the email for what it is, harassment from someone trying to damage her career. The response comes faster than I expected, my phone lighting up with notifications as dozens of people comment and message. Several of my mother's colleagues from other restaurants share their own stories about postpartum depression and anxiety, talking about how the stigma almost destroyed their careers. 3 women send me direct messages saying my father's name sounds familiar from their pasts, that they think they might have dated him or known him years ago. I forward everything to Rowan immediately like he told me to, watching the message count climb as more people respond with support and their own experiences. One message stands out from the others, a woman named Courtney who says she dated my father 8 years ago and has a story that sounds a lot like what happened to my mother and Alicia. I click on Courtney's message and start reading, my stomach getting tighter with every line. She tells me she met my father at a coffee shop 8 years ago when she was 23 and just out of college, working her first real job at a marketing firm. He was charming and attentive, told her he was a contractor who'd been married once, but his ex-wife had cheated on him. They dated for 3 months before she got pregnant, and when she panicked, he held her hands and said he'd had a vasectomy years ago, so this was meant to be, that they were supposed to start a family together. He talked about baby names and looking at bigger apartments, made her feel safe about keeping it even though she wasn't ready. Then at 12 weeks, she started bleeding at work and went to the emergency room alone because he said he had a job he couldn't miss. She lost the baby that night, texted him from the hospital, and he never responded. His phone went straight to voicemail the next day, and when she drove to his apartment, the landlord said he'd moved out 2 days before without giving notice. She found out 6 months later through a mutual friend that he'd been seeing 2 other women at the same time, both younger than her, and he'd told them the same vasectomy story. Courtney ends the message saying she spent 8 years thinking she was stupid for believing him, but reading my posts made her realize he's done this to multiple women, and she wants to help however she can. I forward everything to Rowan immediately and text him that we have another victim with documentation. He calls back within 10 minutes asking if Courtney will talk to him and Alicia, that hearing from other survivors might help her process what happened. I message Courtney asking if she's willing to do a video call with my lawyer and the first woman my father targeted, explaining that we're building a case and her story matters. She responds yes before I even finish typing the next message. Rowan sets up the call for that evening and sends the link to me, Alicia, and Courtney. When we all connect at 7, Courtney looks tired but determined, her dark hair pulled back and her eyes red like she's been crying. Alicia introduces herself and explains what my father did to her in college, and I watch Courtney's face crumble as she realizes the pattern goes back even further than she thought. She tells us everything again, this time with more details about how he love-bombed her in the beginning, showing up at her office with coffee, texting her constantly, making her feel like the center of his world. Then he started suggesting she spend less time with her friends because they didn't understand their connection, that her family was too controlling and she should create distance. By the time she got pregnant, she'd isolated herself so completely that she had no one to talk to about her fears, and he used that isolation to pressure her into keeping it. When she lost the baby, he disappeared like she'd never existed, and she spent months blaming herself for not being enough to make him stay. Alicia is crying by the end, telling Courtney it wasn't her fault, and our father is a predator who targets vulnerable women systematically. Courtney pulls out her laptop and shows us emails he sent during those 3 months. Dozens of messages talking about their future and what kind of parents they'd be, picking out baby names and discussing whether they wanted a boy or girl first. The emails are so manipulative it makes me sick, every line designed to make her feel safe and loved while he trapped her. Rowan is taking notes the whole time, asking specific questions about timeline and whether she has any proof he was seeing other women simultaneously. Courtney says she has screenshots of text messages from the mutual friend who told her about the other women. Plus, she kept a journal during that time documenting everything because her therapist suggested it. She agrees to send everything to Rowan and sign a statement about what happened. 3 days later, Rowan calls me with news that the private investigator found Hannah Ludwig in Seattle. She's a public defender now, 38 years old, and when the investigator contacted her, she refused to talk at first. I ask Rowan if I can reach out to her directly, and he gives me her email address with permission to send the therapy notes that mention her by name. I write her a careful message explaining who I am, that my father targeted my mother and at least 3 other women we know of, and that Dr. Rodriguez's notes from 15 years ago mention a pre-law student he stalked after his first victim escaped. I attach the relevant pages with her name and send it before I can second-guess myself. Hannah calls me at midnight that same night, and I answer the phone to the sound of someone crying so hard they can barely breathe. She tells me she's been in therapy for 15 years trying to convince herself she wasn't crazy, that what my father did was real abuse even though he never hit her. After Alicia escaped by having an abortion, my father fixated on Hannah during their senior year of college. He started showing up everywhere she studied, at the library and coffee shops and even outside her dorm. He sent gifts to her room, flowers and books and jewelry, always with notes about how they were meant to be together. She tried to ignore him, but he escalated, following her to classes and waiting outside when they ended, showing up at parties she attended. She finally agreed to go on one date with him, hoping it would make him stop, and he acted like that one date meant they were in a relationship. 2 months later, she realized she was pregnant, even though they'd used condoms every time. And when she confronted him, he admitted he'd been tampering with them, because he knew she was meant to be the mother of his children. He actually said those words to her, that they were meant to have a family together, and he'd made sure it would happen. Hannah had an abortion at 8 weeks and transferred to a different law school across the country, changing her phone number and blocking him on everything. She's been terrified for 15 years that he'd find her again, and hearing there are other victims makes her sob with something between relief and rage. I stay on the phone with her for 2 hours, listening to her story and telling her about my mother and Alicia and Courtney. By the end, she agrees to talk to Rowan and provide a statement, saying she wants my father to face consequences for what he's done to all of us. Rowan schedules another video call, and now we have 4 women spanning 20 years, all describing the same pattern of reproductive coercion and manipulation. He compiles all the testimony and evidence and sends it to Kenneth Harmon, explaining that this isn't just about blackmail and stolen child support anymore. Kenneth calls me directly 2 days later saying the pattern evidence could support additional charges including stalking, harassment, and fraud, that my father's behavior shows clear intent to trap and control women through pregnancy. He sounds angry in a way that makes me think he has daughters of his own. My phone rings while I'm still processing Kenneth's call, and I see it's my grandmother calling for the first time since I confronted her about knowing the truth. I remember Rowan telling me to record any contact from family members, so I start the recording app before I answer. She's crying immediately, her voice shaking as she tells me my father is not a monster, and I'm destroying the family over mistakes he made when he was young. She says everyone makes bad choices, and I should forgive him because he's my father, and family is supposed to stick together no matter what. I feel something cold settle in my chest as I listen to her defend him, and I tell her that targeting multiple women over 2 decades isn't a mistake. I explain that it's a pattern, that he's a predator who's been doing this since college, and her protection of him enabled him to keep hurting people. She starts crying harder and says I'm being cruel, that I don't understand what it's like to watch your child suffer consequences. I tell her I understand exactly what it's like because I watched my mother suffer consequences for 20 years for something that wasn't her fault. Consequences my grandmother helped create by staying silent. She hangs up on me without saying goodbye, and I sit there holding my phone feeling the family fracture in real time. But there's also this strange sense of clarity, like I can finally see everyone's true priorities, and mine are different from theirs. I save the recording and send it to Rowan, who says it might be useful if my grandmother tries to testify on my father's behalf. 2 hours later, Dr. Rodriguez calls with news that 2 more women contacted her office after seeing my social media posts. Both of them claim my father did similar things to them, one in her early 20s and one in her 30s, and they're willing to provide statements. The licensing board investigator who was reviewing Dr. Rodriguez's ethical breach is now interested in the therapy notes as evidence of a serial predator, rather than just a violation of patient confidentiality. Dr. Rodriguez sounds exhausted, but also relieved, like she's been carrying the weight of those notes alone for 15 years. And finally has help. My mother and Victor land the next morning, and I meet them at Rowan's office where Alicia is already waiting. The moment my mother walks through the door and sees Alicia standing there, both of them freeze for a second before rushing together. They hug like survivors of the same disaster meeting 20 years later, both crying, and I watch this woman my father hurt first embrace the woman he hurt second, while I stand there as proof of his success with the third attempt. Alicia keeps saying she's sorry, that she should have warned people somehow, and my mother keeps shaking her head saying there was no way to know he'd keep doing this. Victor puts his hand on my shoulder and squeezes gently, and Rowan gives everyone a minute before clearing his throat and gesturing to the conference table. We spend the next 6 hours going through everything, spreading documents across every surface until the table looks like a crime scene investigation board. Bank statements showing my father cashing child support checks, medical records from my mother's breakdown, emails from Alicia's restraining order, text messages from Courtney about the fake vasectomy, therapy notes describing my father's planning, social media posts from the women who contacted me after seeing my story. Kenneth Harmon arrives around noon and sits down with his notepad, listening to each woman tell her piece of the story while taking notes. He asks detailed questions about dates, locations, evidence, and I can see him building a case in real time. When we finish, he leans back in his chair and says, "They can charge my father with extortion for the blackmail texts, fraud for stealing the child support money, stalking based on the pattern of targeting and following women, and reproductive coercion depending on how the state laws apply." He explains that having multiple victims across 2 decades makes this clearly calculated behavior, not isolated incidents or mistakes. The pattern evidence is strong enough that a jury would see my father knew exactly what he was doing each time. My father's lawyer calls Rowan the next day trying to negotiate, claiming the blackmail was just emotional distress from a father worried about his daughter, and offering to return some of the stolen money if we drop the criminal charges. Rowan puts him on speaker so we can all hear, and the lawyer's voice is smooth and reasonable, talking about how families should work things out privately, and how my father has already suffered enough. Rowan waits until he finishes and then says no in the flattest voice I've ever heard. He tells the lawyer he's filing additional civil suits on behalf of my mother for emotional distress and fraud, and that Kenneth Harmon is moving forward with criminal charges regardless of any negotiation attempts. The lawyer sputters something about everyone being unreasonable, and Rowan hangs up. Courtney's brother Felix messages me that evening saying he works in tech and wants to help track down any other evidence of my father's activities online. He runs searches using my father's old usernames and email addresses, digging through archived websites and deleted social media accounts. 3 days later, he calls me sounding shocked and sends me a link to a deleted blog from 15 years ago. The blog is archived on an old backup site, and my father wrote about dating strategies and relationship advice under a fake name. I start reading and feel sick within minutes because the posts describe love bombing techniques, isolation tactics, and something he calls baby trap advantages in language so cold it sounds like instructions. Felix has already preserved everything with timestamps and metadata, creating a digital evidence file that shows my father was literally writing guides on how to trap women. Kenneth Harmon comes back to Rowan's office to review the blog posts, and I watch his face change as he reads. He's a prosecutor who's seen plenty of bad cases, but even he looks disturbed by how calculated the writing is. My father describes targeting women with good careers and family money, earning their trust through intense attention, then creating pregnancy situations they can't escape from. He writes about documenting their struggles to use against them later, about how family courts favor fathers if mothers seem unstable, about keeping insurance material for future leverage. Felix has found over 50 posts spanning 3 years, all archived and authenticated. Kenneth says this evidence makes the case even stronger because it shows premeditation and pattern going back further than any of us knew. Hannah calls me the next morning from Seattle saying she needs to face this after running for 15 years. She books a flight to arrive that afternoon, and suddenly our coalition grows to 6 women plus Victor and Felix as allies. We meet at a coffee shop near Rowan's office, and there's something powerful about sitting together in person. Alicia and Hannah recognize each other from college and hug, both of them crying about the 20 years they've spent apart while my father kept hunting. Courtney brings her therapy journal from 8 years ago, and we compare notes about his tactics. The love bombing was identical. The isolation from friends and family followed the same pattern. The pregnancy situations all involved some form of reproductive coercion. We weren't crazy. We weren't alone. And sitting together proves my father's behavior was a system he refined over decades. My father tries to contact my grandmother to get her to pressure me, but she calls Rowan's investigator instead and tells him my father is asking her to lie to the court about his finances. Her voice shakes on the recording as she admits he wants her to say she gave him money to help raise me, to explain away some of the child support he stole. She's scared of losing her son, but also starting to see what he really is, and when the investigator asks if she knew about the other women, she breaks down crying and says she should have told the truth years ago. The investigator sends the recording to Kenneth, and suddenly we have evidence my father is trying to tamper with witnesses. 2 days later, the restaurant board in Paris releases a statement on their website supporting my mother completely. They share resources about postpartum mental health and condemn the cowardly blackmail attempt, explaining that they stand behind their head chef and her courage in speaking about her past trauma. Several prominent chefs post messages of solidarity on social media, and my mother cries reading them because she expected to lose everything. Victor tells me she spent the whole flight over convinced the restaurant would fire her, that her career was finished, that my father would finally succeed in destroying what she built. Instead, she's getting support from her professional community, and the blackmail photos my father threatened to release have lost their power. Kenneth Harmon brings formal charges against my father 3 weeks after the blackmail texts: extortion, fraud, stalking, and criminal harassment based on the restraining order violations he kept committing. The bail hearing happens fast, and Kenneth argues my father is a danger to multiple women based on the pattern evidence. The judge sets bail at $200,000 because of the 20-year history of targeting and trapping women. My father is arrested at his workplace, walked out in handcuffs in front of his co-workers, and I find out about it when Kenneth calls to tell me it's done. I'm sitting in my apartment when I get the news, and I just stare at my phone for a long time, trying to process that my father is actually facing consequences. Alicia texts the group chat asking if everyone is okay, and responses flood in from all 6 of us. We're scared, we're relieved, we're angry, we're hopeful, and we're together in this in a way none of us expected when we woke up a month ago. The news stations pick up the story within hours of my father's arrest. I'm scrolling through my phone when I see the headline on the local news website: "Man arrested for 20-year pattern of reproductive coercion and financial fraud." They don't use his name in the headline, but the article has his booking photo, and suddenly my phone starts buzzing with texts from people I haven't talked to in years. Some are supportive, some are nosy, some just want details. I turn my phone off and sit on my couch staring at the wall. Rowan calls my landline 2 days later to tell me 3 more women contacted his office after seeing the news coverage. They all dated my father briefly at different points over the last 15 years and experienced similar controlling behavior. One of them says he tried to sabotage her birth control, but she caught him. Another says he became obsessed after 2 dates and started showing up at her work. The third says he proposed after 3 weeks and got angry when she said it was too fast. None of them pressed charges at the time, but now they want to give statements. Kenneth adds their information to the growing file of evidence showing my father's pattern. I start therapy twice a week instead of once. Dr. Rodriguez squeezes me into her schedule on Tuesday and Friday afternoons, and we sit in her office working through the reality that I exist because my father deliberately trapped my mother. Some sessions I can talk about it clinically, separating myself from the circumstances of my conception. Other sessions I can barely breathe thinking about how my entire life started with his calculated abuse. Dr. Rodriguez helps me understand that my worth isn't determined by how I came into the world, but some days that knowledge doesn't make the weight any lighter. She gives me exercises for when the thoughts get too heavy. Breathing patterns, grounding techniques, ways to separate my identity from my origins. I practice them at home, in my car, in the grocery store, when I suddenly remember that my father researched family law before getting my mother pregnant. My mother flies back from Paris for a week, and we spend hours in my apartment talking about her 2 years of trying to be a parent while drowning in postpartum psychosis. She brings journals from that time, and I read entries where she writes about loving me desperately, while also being terrified she'd hurt me. The handwriting gets shaky in some entries, almost illegible in others. One entry from 3 weeks before her suicide attempt just says, I can't, over and over for 2 pages. Another entry describes my father documenting every moment she struggled, every time she cried, every instance of her asking for help. He was building his case for custody while she was barely surviving. She shows me a photo from my 2nd birthday party. She's holding me in the picture, but her eyes are completely empty, and my father is in the background with his phone out recording. He used her illness against her while pretending to support her. Victor calls every night to check on her, and I can hear the worry in his voice even through the phone. Alicia becomes someone I talk to almost daily. She flies in again 3 weeks after the arrest and stays for a few days, meeting me for coffee and walking around the city while we process everything. She tells me about her own therapy journey after escaping my father, how it took years to trust anyone again, how she almost didn't get married because she was so afraid of being trapped. But she did get married 10 years ago and has 2 kids she chose to have, and works helping other women navigate reproductive health care. She shows me photos of her family and talks about how healing it was to make those choices for herself. She becomes this unexpected mentor figure who helps me see that my father's destruction doesn't have to define the rest of my life. We text throughout the week between her visits, and she always knows when I'm having a bad day before I even say anything. The preliminary hearing gets scheduled for 6 weeks out, and Rowan starts preparing us for my father's defense strategy. He explains that my father's lawyer will likely try to attack each woman's credibility individually, suggesting we're lying or exaggerating or misremembering. Kenneth assures us the pattern evidence makes that approach much harder to succeed with, because it's not just one woman's word against my father's, but 6 women describing identical behavior across 2 decades. We have multiple preparation sessions where Rowan walks us through potential questions and how to answer them clearly and calmly. He reminds us to stick to facts, to not get defensive, to let the evidence speak for itself. 2 weeks before the hearing, my father's lawyer files a motion to exclude the therapy notes, arguing doctor-patient privilege protects them from being admitted as evidence. Dr. Rodriguez's attorney fights back, arguing the mandatory reporting exception for ongoing harm and pattern of abuse. The hearing on the motion takes 3 hours, and I sit in the back of the courtroom watching the judge review the notes page by page. My father's lawyer keeps saying the notes are prejudicial and violate his privacy rights. Dr. Rodriguez's attorney points out that my father wrote about his plans to trap and control women, that the notes document ongoing criminal behavior, that keeping them secret would allow him to continue hurting people. The judge takes 2 days to decide and then rules the notes are admissible. Rowan calls me immediately, and I can hear the relief in his voice. "This is huge," he says. "The notes establish premeditation and pattern. They show this wasn't impulsive or emotional, but calculated and systematic. I feel something loosen in my chest that's been tight since the blackmail texts." The preliminary hearing happens on a cold morning in late October. I wear a simple blue dress and keep my hair pulled back because Rowan said to look professional but approachable. The courtroom is smaller than I expected, and my father sits at a table with his lawyer, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my rent. He doesn't look at me when I walk in. I take the stand first, and the prosecutor, working with Kenneth, walks me through the blackmail texts and the stolen child support money. I read the texts out loud in court, my voice steady even though my hands shake holding the printed copies. My father's lawyer tries to suggest I misunderstood his intent, that he was just upset about the lawsuit, that the texts were taken out of context. I explain there's no context where threatening to destroy someone's career with photos from their mental health crisis is acceptable. The lawyer asks if I'm sure my father stole the money, or if maybe my mother is lying about sending it. I pull out the bank statements showing every monthly transfer for 18 years, all deposited into accounts with my father's name. The judge looks increasingly annoyed with the lawyer's questions. My mother testifies next about the reproductive coercion, the financial abuse, and the 2 years of hell my father put her through while she was severely mentally ill. My father's lawyer tries to suggest she's lying or misremembering because of her mental health history. Kenneth objects immediately, and the judge sustains it, telling the lawyer to move on. My mother describes my father sabotaging her birth control, threatening to destroy her career if she didn't have me, documenting her psychosis to use against her in custody court. She has medical records, psychiatric evaluations, and commitment papers that make everything she says impossible to deny. My father stares at the table the whole time she talks. Alicia testifies about the college incident, the threats, the restraining order she had to get, and 20 years of wondering if he'd done it to others. She brings the emails he sent threatening to tell her parents about the abortion and contact medical schools with character concerns. My father's face goes red when she reads one email out loud where he wrote that she'd regret choosing her career over their child. The judge asks to see the emails and spends several minutes reading them while the courtroom stays silent. Alicia's voice only shakes once, when she talks about transferring universities to escape him. Hannah testifies via video link from Seattle because she can't take time off work to fly here. She describes the stalking, showing up at her classes and dorm, the gifts he sent, the tampering with condoms. She explains how he admitted doing it because they were meant to have a family together. Her face on the screen looks pale but determined. Courtney testifies in person about the fake vasectomy and his disappearance after her miscarriage. Her voice shakes, but she gets through it, describing how he promised marriage and forever, and then blocked her number and moved without telling her. She brings text messages where he talks about baby names and nursery colors. The judge takes notes through all of it. The judge sets down her pen and looks directly at my father for the first time since testimony started. She says the evidence is more than enough to bind him over for trial on all charges, and based on the pattern of behavior plus multiple restraining order violations, she's raising his bail to $200,000. My father's face goes white as the bailiff walks over to him. Kenneth stands and adds that my father has shown continued disregard for court orders and poses an ongoing threat to multiple victims. The judge agrees and orders him held without bail pending trial. 2 bailiffs move to either side of my father and put handcuffs on him right there at the defense table. He tries to turn and look at me, but one of the bailiffs puts a hand on his shoulder and guides him toward the side door. I watch him get let out in handcuffs and feel this weird mix of relief and complete exhaustion, like I've been holding my breath for months and finally let it out. My mother reaches over and squeezes my hand, and Alicia puts her arm around my shoulders from the other side. We all sit there for a minute after he's gone. Nobody saying anything, just processing what just happened. Rowan comes over and tells us this is a huge win, that the judge clearly saw through the defense's attempts to discredit the victims. Kenneth joins us and explains the next steps, but honestly, I barely hear him because my ears are ringing and my hands won't stop shaking. 3 weeks pass before Rowan calls me about a development. My father's lawyer contacted him about a possible plea deal. They're offering to plead guilty to the fraud and extortion charges if we drop the stalking and harassment charges. Kenneth is willing to consider it because it would spare all of us from going through a full trial, but he wants our input before making any decisions. I immediately text the group chat we set up with all 6 primary victims plus supporters. Within an hour, we schedule an emergency coalition meeting at Rowan's office for the next day. I spend that whole night lying awake thinking about whether I want to face my father in a trial or just be done with this whole thing. Part of me wants him to face maximum consequences for everything he did. Another part of me just wants it over so I can start actually healing, instead of living in this constant legal battle stress. The meeting happens in Rowan's big conference room with all 6 of us victims plus Victor and Felix. Hannah joins via video call from Seattle since she can't take more time off work. Rowan lays out the plea offer in detail, explaining what charges would stick and what would get dropped. Kenneth is there too, and walks us through what a trial would look like versus accepting a plea. Hannah speaks first through the screen, saying she really doesn't want to testify again in a full trial, that the preliminary hearing was hard enough, and she's not sure she can handle cross-examination. Courtney immediately says she wants maximum consequences and doesn't trust that a plea deal will actually punish him enough for 20 years of hurting women. Alicia stays quiet for a while, then says she'll support whatever the group decides because we're all in this together. The other 3 victims share their thoughts, 2 leaning toward the plea to avoid trial trauma, 1 wanting to push for maximum charges. We go back and forth for almost 2 hours, everyone sharing their fears and needs and what they think will help them move forward. Sitting there listening to everyone, I realize this decision isn't really about punishment at all. It's about what will actually help each of us heal and move forward with our lives. Some of us need the closure of him admitting guilt publicly. Some of us need to avoid the trauma of reliving everything in detailed trial testimony. Some of us need to see him face serious consequences. All of those needs are valid and they don't all point to the same answer. I suggest we vote on accepting a plea deal only if it includes significant prison time, full financial restitution to my mother, and whatever registration is required under state law. Everyone agrees that's a good framework. We vote, and it's 5 in favor of accepting a plea with those terms, 1 against. Courtney is the holdout, but she says she'll accept the group decision even though she personally wants him to face trial. Kenneth tells us he'll go back to the defense with our conditions and see what they counter with. The plea negotiation drags on for 2 more weeks with Kenneth pushing hard for 5 years in prison. My father's lawyer keeps arguing for probation, claiming my father has no prior record and shows remorse. Kenneth sends me updates every few days, and each time I feel this knot in my stomach wondering if my father will get off easy. Finally, they reach a settlement that Kenneth thinks is the best we'll get without going to trial. 3 years in prison, 5 years probation after release, full restitution of $800,000 plus interest to my mother and mandatory counseling for the entire probation period. Kenneth calls each of us victims individually to get our final approval. When he calls me, I ask if 3 years is enough for 20 years of abuse. He's quiet for a second, then says, no prison time is really enough, but 3 years is significant, and the restitution plus probation conditions mean ongoing consequences for years. I tell him I approve the deal. The plea hearing is scheduled for the following week. My father has to allocate, which Kenneth explains means stating exactly what he did in open court as part of accepting the plea. I sit in the front row with my mother, Victor, Alicia, Hannah on video link, and Courtney. My father stands at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit looking smaller than I remember. The judge asks him to state his plea, and he says guilty in this flat voice. Then she makes him go through each charge and explain what he actually did. He has to say out loud that he deliberately tampered with birth control to get my mother pregnant against her will. He has to admit he stole child support payments for 18 years, cashing checks meant for my care and hiding the money. He has to confess to extorting me and my mother with photos from her mental health crisis. Hearing him say these things in his own voice feels completely surreal but also necessary, like he's finally being forced to name what he did instead of hiding behind excuses. His voice shakes when he admits to tampering with birth control, and I wonder if he's actually feeling guilt or just performing for the judge. The judge accepts his plea and sentences him to 3 years in state prison, followed by 5 years probation. 3 months after the plea hearing, I get a call from Rowan about the financial case. Talia Redmond, the family court judge handling that part, has ordered my father to liquidate all his hidden assets immediately to pay the full restitution to my mother. The boat gets sold at auction. The motorcycle collection gets picked up by a dealer who pays cash. The investment properties go on the market and sell within weeks, because they're actually decent properties in good locations. Everything my father built with my mother's stolen money gets converted to cash and handed over. Rowan calls my mother directly when the check arrives, and I'm on the phone with her when she opens the envelope. $873,000, the full amount plus interest. She starts crying and can't talk for a minute. Victor takes the phone and tells me they're going to set up a trust fund for my education and donate a portion to organizations helping abuse survivors. My mother gets back on the phone and says she never thought she'd actually see this money again. That part of her believed my father would find a way to hide it forever. My grandmother contacts me one more time about a month after my father starts serving his sentence. She sends a long email asking if I'll visit him in prison, because he's still my father, and family is supposed to forgive. She writes that he's suffering and lonely and needs his daughter's support. She says everyone makes mistakes and holding grudges only hurts me in the end. I read the email 3 times, feeling this old familiar guilt trying to creep back in. Then I write back a single paragraph. I tell her that being related to someone doesn't obligate me to accept abuse or support them through consequences of their own actions. I explain that I'm done protecting people who hurt others just because they're family. I say I hope she finds peace, but I won't be visiting my father now or ever. She doesn't respond, and I hear through extended family that she moves to another state to live with her sister. The family fracture is complete and permanent, but I feel clear about my choice in a way I never did before. 4 months after that, Dr. Rodriguez calls me with news about the licensing board investigation. They've cleared her of any ethical violations after reviewing the mandatory reporting exception and all the evidence of ongoing harm my father was causing. She sounds almost shocked telling me this, like she really expected to lose her license. The board actually gives her a formal commendation for her courage in coming forward and helping stop a serial predator. When we meet for our regular therapy session the next week, she tells me privately that the investigation was terrifying, and there were nights she couldn't sleep wondering if she'd destroyed her career. But she says she'd do it again because staying silent would have been worse than any professional consequence. I thank her for risking everything to help me and all the other women my father hurt. She gets tears in her eyes and says watching us support each other through this has been the most meaningful work of her career. 6 months after my father sent those blackmail texts, I'm sitting in my mother's restaurant in Paris with Victor, Alicia, Hannah, and Courtney, who all flew in for what we're calling a Survivors Summit, but is really just us supporting each other and celebrating making it through. The restaurant is closed for a private event, which is us. My mother cooks us a 7-course meal, each dish more incredible than the last. Between courses, we talk about where we are now, what we're doing with our lives, how we're healing. Hannah got a promotion at the public defender's office. Courtney started grad school for counseling. Alicia's hospital gave her an award for her advocacy work. Victor keeps refilling our wine glasses and making toasts in French that my mother translates. When dessert comes out, my mother stands up with her own glass and makes a toast to surviving, to justice, to women supporting women, and to building lives our abusers never wanted us to have. We all raise our glasses, and I look around the table at these women who were strangers 6 months ago and are now forever connected by shared trauma and shared victory. My mother's eyes meet mine across the table, and she smiles with tears running down her face. I smile back and feel something shift inside me, like maybe I'm finally becoming the person I was supposed to be before my father's lies shaped my whole life. The weeks after Paris bring a rhythm I never expected to have with my mother. We video call every Tuesday and Friday evening, her in her restaurant kitchen during prep time, me in my apartment between classes. She shows me how to properly dice vegetables while I tell her about my therapy sessions, and the legal proceedings still wrapping up. Sometimes Victor joins the calls and makes jokes in French that my mother translates, and I'm learning their language slowly through an app she recommended. We're planning for me to spend 8 weeks in Paris next summer, and my mother already has a list of places she wants to take me, recipes she wants to teach me, stories she wants to share about the 20 years we lost. It's not the relationship we would have built if my father hadn't destroyed her, but it's real and growing, and that matters more than the perfection we'll never have. The restitution money sits in my account like a weight, and an opportunity at the same time. I pay off my remaining college tuition in one payment, and my academic advisor actually calls me to make sure the payment isn't a mistake. The rest I split between my future and helping others. Alicia flies in for a weekend, and we spend 2 days at my kitchen table with a lawyer she knows, setting up a nonprofit fund for survivors of reproductive coercion. We call it the Autonomy Project, and within a week of launching our website, we get our first grant application from a woman in Oregon whose partner sabotaged her IUD. Alicia handles most of the administrative work since she has experience running hospital programs, but I review every application and write personal responses to each woman who reaches out. Some of their stories make me cry, but helping them access resources for legal aid, therapy, and financial support feels like turning my father's theft into something that actually helps people. Hannah emails me 3 months after Paris with an idea for a legal journal article about reproductive coercion and the gaps in current law. We spend hours on video calls mapping out our argument, pulling research, interviewing other survivors from our growing coalition. She writes the legal analysis while I handle the personal narratives and policy recommendations. The article gets published 6 months later in a family law journal, and suddenly we're getting invitations to speak at law schools about the issue. Our first speaking engagement is at Hannah's alma mater in Seattle, and standing in front of 70 law students talking about my father's crimes feels surreal but necessary. After our presentation, 5 students approach us privately to share their own experiences with reproductive coercion, and Hannah and I exchange a look that says we're doing something that matters. Courtney sends me a photo of her acceptance letter to a graduate counseling program 4 months after the plea deal. She's going back to the school to become a therapist, specializing in intimate partner abuse, and she tells me our coalition helped her realize she wants to help other women recognize and escape controlling relationships before they get trapped. Her brother Felix, who helped us track down my father's online activities, develops a safety app for documenting abuse evidence that encrypts photos and messages in a way that abusers can't access or delete. He launches it for free, and within 2 months, over 1,000 women have downloaded it. Courtney beta tests every feature and provides feedback from a survivor's perspective, and watching her transform her trauma into purpose reminds me that healing looks different for everyone. Kenneth Harmon calls me 10 months into my father's sentence with news that makes my stomach turn. My father has been violating probation rules repeatedly by trying to contact victims through intermediaries, using other inmates' phone privileges to leave messages, sending letters through his mother to our addresses. Each violation adds time to his sentence, and Kenneth tells me this pattern shows my father still doesn't accept responsibility for his actions. He's not learning or changing, just finding new ways to maintain control even from prison. The prison psychologist's reports describe him as manipulative and lacking genuine remorse, more concerned with being caught than with the harm he caused. Kenneth says my father will likely serve his full 3 years, plus additional time for the violations, and while part of me feels satisfied by this, another part just feels tired of him still taking up space in our lives. My grandmother calls me once from her new place in another state, and I almost don't answer. She's living with her sister now, unable to face the community judgment and the whispers that follow her at church and the grocery store. She wants to know if I'll ever forgive her, if there's a path back to having a relationship. I tell her honestly that I feel sad about losing her, but also clear that her choice to protect my father over his victims made this outcome the only one possible. She chose her son over the truth, over me, over every woman he hurt, and those choices have consequences. She cries and tells me she loves me, and I say I know, but love isn't enough when it comes with silence about abuse. We hang up and I block her number because I need to focus on moving forward, not on people who chose to look away. 2 years after the plea deal, I walk across the stage at my college graduation in a blue gown that cost more than I would have been able to afford before the restitution. My mother and Victor fly in from Paris, and Alicia drives up from her city, and Hannah takes time off from the public defender's office to be here. Dr. Rodriguez sits with them in the audience, and after the ceremony, we take a photo together that I post on social media with a caption about the importance of women supporting women. My mother cries through the whole ceremony, and when I find her afterward, she hugs me so tight I can barely breathe. Victor takes dozens of photos of us together, and my mother keeps saying she's so proud. She's so proud, and I believe her completely. We go to dinner at a nice restaurant, and my mother orders wine for everyone and makes a toast to surviving and to futures that our abusers tried to steal. The table raises glasses, and I look around at these people who showed up for me, who helped me fight, who became my real family. 3 months after graduation, my mother calls me screaming in French before switching to English. Her restaurant just got its 2nd Michelin star, jumping from 1 to 2 in a single year. She's sobbing and laughing at the same time, and I can hear Victor cheering in the background and her staff applauding. She tells me the Michelin inspectors cited her creative risks and bold flavor combinations, and she credits the support she received during the scandal for giving her the courage to stop playing it safe. A food magazine interviews her the next week, and she tells them that surviving my father's abuse taught her she's stronger than she ever knew, that facing her worst fears about her past being exposed freed her to take risks in her cooking. The article runs with a photo of her in her chef's whites, looking confident and proud, and I frame it and hang it in my apartment. My law school acceptance letter arrives on a Tuesday in April. Thick envelope from a school known for its family law program. I get in with a scholarship that covers half tuition, and the restitution money means I can attend without taking on debt. I'm going to specialize in family law and victim advocacy, inspired by Rowan's work, and determined to help other people navigate systems that often fail survivors. The acceptance feels like justice transforming into opportunity, like my father's stolen money becoming the foundation for me to help other people fight abusers like him. I call my mother first and she cries, then Alicia, who says she knew I'd get in, then Hannah, who offers to mentor me through law school since she remembers how hard it was. Dr. Rodriguez sends me a card with a note saying she's proud of the woman I've become, and I keep it in my desk drawer to read on hard days. 3 years after I found my mother's Instagram and sent that angry message that started everything, our coalition of survivors holds its 3rd annual gathering. We've grown from the original 6 of us to 12 women my father targeted over 2 decades, plus countless others we've helped through the nonprofit. We meet at a retreat center for a weekend, sharing updates about our lives, supporting each other through hard days, celebrating victories big and small. Alicia brings her kids and they play with Courtney's niece while we talk. Hannah presents research on new reproductive coercion laws being proposed in 4 states. Felix demos the latest version of his safety app. My mother and Victor cook us a feast on Saturday night, and we eat together at a long table, survivors and allies and chosen family. On Sunday morning before everyone leaves, we stand in a circle and each person shares one thing they've reclaimed from their trauma. Alicia says her trust in her own judgment. Hannah says her belief that the legal system can work if you fight hard enough. Courtney says her ability to help others without losing herself. My mother says her daughter. When it's my turn, I say my future and everyone nods like they understand exactly what I mean. 2 months after that gathering, I meet someone at a community event who asks me about my advocacy work and actually listens when I explain my boundaries about personal questions. We start dating slowly, with me being upfront about my history and the trust issues that come with it. Some mornings I wake up anxious that they're trying to control me somehow, checking my phone too much or second-guessing their kindness, but my therapist helps me separate past trauma from present reality. My partner never pushes, never makes me feel guilty for needing space, and on the days when I struggle, they just sit with me and wait until I'm ready to talk. It's different from anything I imagined a relationship could be, built on honesty instead of manipulation, and that makes it worth the hard work of learning to trust again. My mother suggests a trip to the coast in early fall, just the 2 of us, and I take a week off from my nonprofit work to go. We rent a small house right on the water and spend our days cooking together in the tiny kitchen, her teaching me techniques she uses at the restaurant while I tell her about law school applications and the women we've helped through the coalition. She makes this incredible fish dish one night using local catch, and I watch her work, seeing the confidence she's rebuilt over the past few years. We talk about the 2 years she tried to parent me while drowning in psychosis, and she cries telling me she's sorry for all the time we lost, but proud of who I've become anyway. I tell her I'm proud of her too, for surviving my father's abuse and building a whole new life, and we spend an evening just sitting on the beach watching the sunset without needing to say anything else. On our last morning there, she makes me breakfast and says she wishes she could have been there for all my other breakfasts growing up, but she's grateful for everyone we get to share now. I start law school the following January with a full scholarship and a clear focus on family law and victim advocacy, inspired by everything Rowan did for us, and determined to help other people navigate systems that fail survivors too often. The restitution money my father stole sits in an account funding my education and the nonprofit, which feels like justice transforming into something useful instead of just punishment. I'm happy now in a way that feels earned through surviving and fighting and refusing to let my father's abuse define my entire life. The work I do helping other women document reproductive coercion and financial abuse feels meaningful because I know exactly what they're facing. My relationships with my mother, with Alicia, with Hannah and Courtney and all the other survivors feel genuine because we've seen each other at our worst and chosen to support each other anyway. I think about the 20 years I spent hating my mother for abandoning me, believing my father's lies, and it still hurts knowing how much time we lost. But I also know that speaking up about what he did helped protect other women from becoming his next victims, and the coalition we built gives survivors resources I wish I'd had earlier. My mother introduces me to her restaurant staff as her daughter, with tears in her eyes every single time, and I've stopped feeling awkward about it because I understand now that she's claiming something my father tried to steal from both of us. The life I'm building feels solid and real, constructed from the pieces of pain my father left behind, but transformed into something he never intended. Some days are still hard, and I still go to therapy twice a week, and I still sometimes wake up anxious about control and trust. But I have meaningful work ahead of me and people who see and value me for who I actually am, and I've learned that surviving something terrible doesn't mean staying broken forever. That's enough.